I'm Amy Mesney from Teaching Ideas for You, and I wanted to come talk to you tonight about testing. Testing is something I feel very passionate about. I have two of my own children, and I had taught for 20 years in the classroom before I came home to homeschool. And I've seen how the testing and how testing has changed has really affected kids. And we have kids who are so stressed out that they're throwing up on their standardized tests. And it's really crazy because when I was a student, I don't even remember my teacher talking about standardized testing. I literally remember, I think I was fourth grade. I walked into the classroom and I was like, oh, the chairs and desks are rearranged. I guess it's testing. But I had not even recalled her talking about testing or saying we're going to test or, oh, tomorrow's the test. Like literally, it was just kind of like, oh, there it is. And we've gotten so far away from that. And I think we have to take a step back as parents, as teachers, as administrators, and start to say, what is it that we're doing that is causing this stress and what can we do about it? So let me get started. It's not going to be a real long presentation tonight, but very targeted, actionable things that you could do with your students even tomorrow. So let's talk about what causes testing related stress. Frankly, there's just too much emphasis on testing. We talk about the test, parents talk about the test, administrators talk about the test, everybody talks about the test, and we talk about how if you don't pass the test, you're going to fail the grade level. And at least that's the way it is here in Florida. And, you know, the kids like freak out about this. I mean, they may not say it in the class, but it's not even always the kids that should worry about failing the test. Like my daughter always got 5s on tests. She's a great test taker. And she would say, well, if I don't pass the test, and I had to like roll my eyes and say, you're going to pass the test. I guess like we're not even going to concern ourselves with if you're going to pass the test. So again, like for my daughter, number 2, it's like self-caused. Some kids are just high anxiety, high achievers, like major stress nerds, and they will put that pressure on themselves even if we never mention the test. Parents and teachers, we talk about test scores a lot, and I know I do it too with my son because unfortunately I have one that's a very good test taker and one that is not a good test taker. And even if I try and just talk to him a little bit about the test, he'll be like, I don't want to talk about this anymore because it's too much. Like it's too much stress just to even talk about it, even though I'm not meaning to put any pressure on it. I'm just trying to say like, you know, like, let's not even worry about it because you can retake it next year, you know, that kind of thing. And then I don't know about you, but like in the elementary schools here, because I had been middle and I had been in elementary school, and elementary school was far worse. You know, the administrators would get on the school news and talk about the test and how, you know, the big test and you got to prepare for the test. You got to be ready for the test. I mean, this was way back in like September and the test is April. So I just think when you put all those things together, it's too much. It's too much for kids and they don't always show it, but like they are freaking out. So what does stress do? Why does this stress affect testing? Let's just talk about how stress affects people in general. Okay. So long ago, we wanted to survive. And really we were like in an eat or be eaten type of world. Think of an alligator. I always tell the kids, this is like your alligator brain. And so when you get really stressed or scared, then that triggers your fight or flight reflex, and that's your amygdala in your brain. And so once that amygdala kicks in, your thinking brain is completely shut down. And I had to explain that to kids a couple times because even if you have like all this knowledge and we've done all the neuron connecting and all that, if that fight or flight reflex kicks in, you can't access any of those things that you learned because it's a protection thing. Like in the past, you know, if you stop to think like, oh, is that going to eat me? Or, you know, you're going to end up dead. So that is why the amygdala cuts off your thinking brain, because literally all it does is let you think, do I fight something or do I get out of here? So unfortunately, when you go into a test nervous, like you are unable to actually think. And that's where you get these kids who say, like, I know it, I just couldn't think of it. They're so nervous that they've just cut themselves off. And this is why we have to teach kids how to de-stress and to lower the stress and the pressure that we are putting on all this testing. So I have four very quick things to go over on how you can do this. One, I think we need to start emphasizing again, why do we test? Because I know my son is a high schooler and he'll come home and he'll be so frustrated and he'll say things like, I don't even know why we test. It's just so stupid. Like, we don't need these tests. But the thing is if testing is used correctly, it's actually a tool. And that's the purpose of testing. Like, we are meant to be able to use this test to decide, where do students need help? Maybe where are they advanced and they need to be accelerated? It's a tool. It's not meant to be a club. And so I always told my kids that. I said, hey, the purpose of this test really is for me. This test is for me to see, did I teach you well enough? And I would phrase it like that to students. Like, this is to make sure that I'm doing my job well, that you've learned what you're supposed to learn. And that's what this test shows me. Because if I didn't do it well, then, people are going to show that they're having trouble. And I know that I need to go back. This takes some of the stress off kids because it's like, oh, it's not me who's really being tested. It's the teacher. The teachers, and so that can help. And part of that is true because that is, if you have a test and you can see everybody failed a certain question, like somewhere either the question is bad or they didn't understand it when you taught it. So it's not that you're lying, but you're just kind of reframing testing for the kids. Then I always taught my kids how stress affects their brain. Just like I talked to you about the amygdala and the alligator brain and the fight or flight, I just explained it because for some kids it clicks as to why they shouldn't stress. And it might be difficult for them to not stress. But for some kids, it'll just having that understanding makes it better. And I think teachers too, we can be mindful and teach a simple technique for them. Like if you're in the test and you're nervous, maybe teach them like breathing techniques or something, ways that they can close their eyes for a few minutes and, maybe envision that they're at the beach or something to take them out of that anxiety. Because if they can cut it before it gets bad, then they might be able to head it off. Another thing is to teach metacognition. And I think this is becoming a big thing in a lot of classrooms. But metacognition is teaching kids to understand how they think, understand how people think. And if you look at metacognition and what it does, it explains to kids like what their strengths are in their thinking and what their weaknesses are. And I thought if you ever study metacognition, it gets to be very interesting because psychologists have found that what it is people are very, very unaware of what they don't know. So, and I think we see some of this sometimes in the news today too, where people think they know stuff, but they actually don't. And the less expert you are, the more blind you are to it from what the studies have shown. And so this is where if you can teach metacognition to your kids, like how thinking occurs, how are you thinking, what are you thinking, this can help them to become aware of, if I didn't understand this, I need to go back over it, or, oh, I really got this and I'm ready to move on. So some things that teachers use to help teach metacognition are pre-assessments. And you make the kids actually like look at it like, oh, look, you already know this, but look, you didn't know all this. And that's why we have to study it. Post-assessments are also good. I tried very hard to make sure I never just passed back tests and the kids took them and ran with them home and then threw them in the trash. But I would pass them out and take the time and say, okay, first page, who has a question they don't understand why it's wrong? Because kids need that. They need to go through and see, how was I thinking? Where was my mistake? How can I change that for future? And that is the purpose of these types of activities. reflective journals or reflection activities like in interactive notebooks, how you have the side where they take notes and the side where they process their thinking. That processing of the thinking is the metacognition. It's getting them to think about what did they understand, what do they know, maybe what do they need to still go over again. Another thing is to ask them to identify what they're confused about. And I think every teacher has done this where you've said, what don't you understand? And they go, oh, I don't know. I mean, I've done it, but that's because sometimes you're just confused by the whole thing, but sometimes you don't know how to articulate where it is you're confused at. So metacognition is the third tip. And my last tip is the one that I talked about earlier. But I think we all, parents, teachers, administrators, we have to stop talking about the test constantly to kids. Like they just internalize it. It makes them sick. They can't focus. They get into the test. And even if they're brilliant, they kick in that amygdala and the alligator brain. And now they've tanked their test. So that I think is something that if it's going on in your school community, it needs to be something maybe you bring up and say, hey, look, we talk about this on the morning news. We talk about it in the class. The parents talk about it. It's in the newsletter. I mean, like every week we're telling kids how, oh, the test is almost here. You got to be ready. And, this is how we are ending up with kids throwing up all over their desk. So my biggest advice, again, is, to teach kids why the stress affects their brain and how it affects their brain, like to teach them how that alligator brain works, teach them how to do metacognition, de-stress the test by just not talking about it so much. These are just simple things that you can do. I think I missed one here. Oh, the purpose of testing. Again, to go back over with kids and say, hey, the testing is really for us just to see what you know. De-stress the test by taking away how much emphasis is on their performance. So I'm really happy that you watched this, and I'm glad that you could join me. I would love for you to connect with me. I have a lot of different ways. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I have my own blog, Pinterest, YouTube, TPT. So you can find me all sorts of ways. I would love to hear your opinions, or if you have another idea of how to de-stress the test. But I appreciate very much you being here tonight. And again, this is Amy Mesney with Teaching Ideas for You. And thank you for joining me.